Welcome to The Writer's Dream. This is a show where writers can talk about how they write their books, how they publish their books, and how they market their books. You can find us on YouTube. Just search my name, Linda Maria Frank. I am the author of Annie Tillery Mysteries. Click on my picture and about 150 interviews will come up, maybe even more than that. Lots of good tips about writing, lots of good tips about local authors and their books. You can find us on Facebook. The name of the page is The Writer's Dream. If you want to ask me a question or you want to be on the show, please message me through that Facebook page. We are also on Cablevision. Currently, we are on Cablevision Channel 20 on Thursdays at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You can also get us here at ltveh.org. Just search The Writer's Dream. Today's guest is Jack Bilello. Jack Bilello is the author of 4 books, Bonds of War, I Still Love Joni James, American Patrol, and Heart of a Lion. He is also a lecturer on topics in American history and world history and other topics, and he is also my host sometimes. Every once in a while we have a book that Jack just can't let go of, and he hosts the show, and he's also been on another show here at LTVEH, Gung Ho. So welcome, Jack.
Thank you. It's good to be here again.
Yes, yes, you're becoming familiar on the set.
Yes.
So this is the question I ask everybody. Every writer takes a journey. What was unique about your journey? Why did you write?
Okay, that's a very good question.
You had a nice, happy life.
Well, I always had the desire to write. In high school, at Brooklyn Technical High School in Brooklyn, I worked on the school newspaper, and then as a teacher and then chairman of the history department at Lindenhurst Public Schools, I did write reviews for a magazine called The History Teacher and others. So and then of course when the opportunity to come across a compelling story which I could not let go of, I had the opportunity to meet a man who was one of 10 to have survived the sinking of a World War II battle cruiser, the USS Juno. There were 700 men aboard Juno, only 10 survived, and I became friendly with one of the 10 survivors. His name was Wyatt Butterfield, and when Wyatt died, I said, I'm not going to let him die. I'm going to tell his story because it's such a compelling story. Survival, 1 of 10 and 10 of 700 of the USS Juno. I said, that's a story that has to be told.
And that's one of the great things about a book is that the people you write about never do die.
Yes.
You keep them alive in those books. So tell us about Bonds of War.
Well, Bonds of War tells the story of the sinking of a battle cruiser, the USS Juno, sunk on Friday the 13th for the Triskaidekaphobia amongst us, November of 1942. The ship was engaged in a hot battle with Japanese naval forces during the sea battle for Guadalcanal. And the ship was crippled on the evening of the 12th of November, but on the 13th of November, trying to get back to the American base at Noumea in New Caledonia, the ship was spotted by a Japanese submarine, the I-26, under the command of Captain Yokota, and he fired a brace of torpedoes from his submarine at the flagship, the USS San Francisco, and missed the San Francisco, hit the Juno in the main midship, and she exploded and sank within 30 seconds. Out of the 700, 140 made it into the water, and in the next 7 dreadful days, 130 of those were killed by shark attacks. So finally, when there was a rescue, really not even an accidental rescue from a PBY, which was a Navy patrol bomber, they rescued these survivors, and that's how Wyatt survived.
Okay, so that's the story of part of the book.
Yes.
What's the other part?
The other part of the book is the Vietnam component, because I thought that was so compelling in its time, that the Vietnam veterans were so badly mistreated when they came home. called Baby Killers, and it's just an awful, awful period in our country's history. So what I did was to fashion a story of a father and son. The father, basically Wyatt, but his name is Jesse Van Twelves in the novel, and his son Donnie, who's a Vietnam veteran. Because of what happened to them in their respective wars, they're cut off from each other. They're both suffering from PTSD, and they're not connecting as a father and son in a true contributing relationship. I got to get these guys together. And that's the whole idea of the novel, to bring these two marvelous men together. And it takes me a few hundred pages, but I think it works.
Yes, it is 367,
50 or
I think. Yeah. So, but writing this book brought you to Iowa, did it not? You want
Yes.
to tell that story? That's a good story.
Yes, what happened was the five Sullivan brothers, which were shipmates of Wyatt Butterfield, Jesse Van Twelves, were from Waterloo, Iowa. Five brothers went down with the ship and were killed. Only time in American history this has been done where in one battle 5 brothers were killed. So and they were born and raised in Waterloo, Iowa, and I was invited to Waterloo, Iowa, with the Grout Museum, which was dedicated to the memory of the brothers who were killed. And before I left, I was approached by a gentleman from Lindenhurst, where I worked. His name was Milton Dumper. And I said, Milton Dumper, his brother, Lawrence, was on the Juno and was killed when he was 18. And all wars are children's wars.
Wow.
The majority of men in Europe after D-Day were teenagers. The average age of a rifleman on Iwo Jima, the furious battle in the Pacific, was 17 to 18 years old. So Milton came up to me and told me that his brother Lawrence was a shipmate of my friend Wyatt Butterfield and the 5 Sullivan brothers, and he was going to sell his house and move to Florida. But he said, I have to tell you this. When my brother joined the Navy, he graduated from Lindenhurst High School in 1941.
Where you taught?
Yeah, that was chairman of the history there. Not 1941.
No, I know, I know.
And
You look good for your age.
And he told me that Lawrence was killed in the sinking of the Juno, but his parents had sent him a Christmas package, as was customary for men in the service. And the card said, "To our darling son, Lawrence, Merry Christmas, 1942. The Navy sent that package back to the family because Lawrence was killed. Mm-hmm. The family put that Christmas package, in their attic, and it was never opened. And Milton had it when he was selling his house. He was cleaning out the house. He said, "I'd like you to have it." I said, "That'd be marvelous." I took it to Iowa with me, to the Grout Museum, and I gave it to them, and they put it on display with the other memorabilia and programs of the 5 Sullivan brothers.
Yeah. And of course, the upshot of the 5 Sullivan brothers perishing on the same ship, they not really passed a law, but it became policy for them not to put brothers in the same.
Yes, customarily it was called the Sullivan's Law, but it was policy not to put the same brothers on the same ship or in the same theater of operations.
Mm-hmm. And it was the inspiration for Saving Private
Absolutely,
Ryan.
that's a true story. There were 3 brothers from upstate New York who were killed, and the 4th brother, they went to save him. They wouldn't want that tragedy to be revisited on.
No.
The family wasn't named Ryan, but it was a true story, that component of it.
So this is another question I'd like to ask. If I'd like you to give me an elevator pitch for your book, and an elevator pitch for our viewers who don't know what it is. It's if you're on an elevator with somebody who you think can publish your book and make you famous, and you're going from the 1st to the 15th floor, what would you say to them? Yeah,
well, the first thing I would say is I wouldn't go from the 1st to the 15th floor if I was on an elevator with a prospective publisher. I would go from the 1st floor to the basement. Why? Because I had the hope that if I was in the basement, the book would be a bestseller.
Ba-doom.
I'm shameless. I admit it.
I know. So,
Yes.
we'll leave Bonds of War and go on to your other book. Well, you have actually 4 books. I Still Love Joni James. Okay, so who the heck is Joni James?
Well, Joni James, little known now, you're absolutely right. But in her time, in the early 50s, she was the number one, the Madonna of her time, or the Beyonce of her time.
I remember her.
Yeah, and she had a string of hits, one after another, and she was so popular that every boy in my neighborhood in Brooklyn was a big fan of Joni James. No question.
She's very
about
pretty
it.
too.
She was very pretty, beautiful, silky voice.
Yeah,
from an echo chamber in those days. That was very big, the echo chamber. And her hits came one after another, and every kid in the neighborhood, listened on those 45 records. We danced at the confraternity dance to Joni James, and she got married. And her husband, Anthony Acquaviva, who was a orchestra leader of the type of Mantovani and Percy Faith in those days, he became very sick very early. She gave up her entire career and was never heard from again. She disappeared from the late 50s. No one ever heard of Joni James again.
And no one ever hears about Joni James in your book either.
Yeah, she's mentioned, but it's really, the whole idea is...
Talk about the book.
Yeah, Margaret Mitchell in Gone with the Wind. It's true, all ages are Gone with the Wind. We have our moment in time, and we think we're something special and something that will always be there. And then it kind of fades from the historical scene, and something else takes over. So truly, all ages are Gone with the Wind, as the 50s are gone, and as Joni James and her music is gone. But that was the whole idea. It's a nostalgic look back to Brooklyn in the 50s. Everything that made Brooklyn such a special place. The Brooklyn Dodgers, Coney Island, Marine Park, the neighborhood, the things that we loved about the borough, the magical borough of Brooklyn. So it's a story of Brooklyn in the 50s. And it's closest to my heart. Hey, I was born in Brooklyn, grew up in East New York, Brooklyn, went to Brooklyn Technical High School, and
it's
that's so close to my heart.
Somewhat a memoir, but
it is fiction because
Yeah.
it is a novel.
Yeah.
It is a novel. Yeah.
but it's because of your experiences you're able to really bring the whole kind of era and location, I think, to life.
For example, one of the things that really struck me was the fact that my mother, who my grandfather always insisted was the best athlete in my family, used to take me to Brooklyn Dodger games on a Thursday afternoon because it was called Ladies' Day. And my mother would pay 50 cents and I would pay nothing. And I became an avid Brooklyn Dodger fan, as my mother and father were, chip off the old block. And when I went to Ebbets Field during the war, because it was during the war, every time the Boston Braves, which was the major league team from Boston at that time, they are now the Atlanta Braves, same franchise, came to Brooklyn. They had a manager by the name of Billy Southworth. And every time Billy Southworth came to argue with an umpire or change a pitcher, I would boo like the brat that I was, Little did I know, and I found out, of course, years later when I was writing the book, that Billy Southworth had an only child, Billy Southworth Jr. And when the Brooklyn Dodgers played the Braves, after the game, Billy Southworth Jr. had joined the Army Air Force, became B-17 bomber pilot, and after training, he took off from Floyd Bennett Field in Brooklyn to join the assault on Nazi Germany, the air assault by the 8th Air Force. And his plane crashed into Jamaica Bay, and it was never found. All hands were lost, 10 brave young American flyers. And little did I know that Billy Southworth, after that game, and after I got through booing him, he would go out to Jamaica Bay and rent a rowboat and grappling hooks, and all by himself.
Look for that.
He would go out to the bay and search for his fallen son. Never found him, and he died of acute alcoholism about 10 years after the war. I mean, these are stories that have to be told. I mean, that's one of the important stories I relate in the book.
So that's basically your impetus when you write, is you have a story that has to be told.
Yes, I believe that it's, as a student of history, there are things that have to be told in the emotion that history should have with it, I think is something we can't escape.
Okay, so you have another book which is not here called American Patrol. And what was the story that had to be told there?
Well, that's a good, my son. My son graduated from the Coast Guard, then spent 12 years in the Coast Guard, mostly interdicting drugs, Colombian drugs. For example, when Pablo Escobar was brought down, my son was on a nuclear attack submarine, the Gato, collecting intelligence and information for the Colombian National Police for the eventual actually killing of Pablo Escobar. And I said, that's a great story. No novel, to the best of my knowledge, has ever been, the entire theme is the United States Coast Guard. It's a story of the United States Coast Guard. Now, the impetus for that, like you say, the thing that drove the story was something that happened to me when I was in college. In college in CCNY, had a teacher, literature teacher, who was teaching E.M. Forster, the great British novelist, Howard's End and Passage to India. And Howard's End was a great novel, and Passage to India was a great novel, but E.M. Forster said something to me which was much more compelling than either novel. He was a student at Cambridge, and he made best friends with 3 other Cambridge students, McLean, Filby, and one other. Burgess, McLean, and Filby. And E.M. Forster once said, now Burgess, McLean, and Filby became notorious spies, the third ring spy during World War II, which cost the lives of thousands of American and British servicemen. They were spies from Russia, for communist spies for Russia. And E.M. Forster was very best friends with these 3. And he once said, if I ever have to make the choice between betraying my country and betraying my best friends, I hope I have the courage to betray my country, which was astonishing. Created an uproar in our class. We were debating and arguing and screaming and yelling about whether it's right, wrong, but it stayed with me. So when it came time for me to write American Patrol, that became one of the most important sub-themes of the novel, as is the whole issue of sexual harassment, which was becoming very important at that age. And I have a teacher at the academy who is accused of really sexual...
In the story.
In the story, it's in the novel. And what I use is William Blake, the great English poet, who once wrote, "We live in an age and in a time when love, sweet love, is thought a crime." And it's, I thought there was that connection, of these encounters that was very trendy during this period of time. So that was also another important subtopic of American Patrol.
So that leads us to your final book. Hopefully it's not your final book. Maybe you'll write another
Yes,
one.
as I was saying before, I asked someone recently, a friend of mine, have you read my last book? He said, I certainly hope so.
That's what every author wants to hear. But Heart of a Lion. Heart of a Lion is, of course, a complete departure because it's written for kids.
Young adults.
Yeah.
And also, it's true. It's creative
story.
nonfiction.
Yeah.
And again, the impulse was there as a serious student of history and teacher of history. There are characters who are little known, but so important. And certainly for young adults, I wanted them to learn about this very important, but basically little known character by the name of Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, who was born in Maine, and he was had a speech impediment. He stuttered when he was a very, very young man. And Joshua had a tremendous force of personality, persistence, and determination. And he worked 12 hours a day, 7 days a week to overcome, and he did. He overcome the handicap. He became a teacher at Bowdoin College, still there. It's the home of Nathaniel Hawthorne, who Joshua knew, and Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who was there before him, but a very important alumnus and teacher at Bowdoin. So when Joshua was teaching at Bowdoin, and at one point in the 1850s, Jefferson Davis came to give the commemoration speech. And Jefferson Davis, at that speech, suggested that Maine should break away from the Union and join the Canadian government.
He was into that
He
kind
was
of
into that.
secession
That was
thing,
in the
huh?
1850s. And Joshua was
I could give him a couple of states today that he should take with him.
And Joshua took serious offense, as did most of the faculty there. So, and also very important, was a very good friend of Joshua and her husband, Harriet Beecher Stowe.
There you go.
Her husband, Henry Ward Beecher, no, that was her brother. Calvin Stowe was her husband.
Yeah.
Calvin Stowe.
But the
was
other guy who you mentioned, her
Henry
brother,
Ward Beecher was a very important minister in Brooklyn.
That's right.
Which is another Brooklyn
on
connection.
Orange Street. The church
Yes,
is on
that
Orange
church.
Street.
And he was, anti-slavery. And he would give sermons against the evils and abomination of slavery and draw 10,000 people to Brooklyn to talk about that. So that was Harriet Beecher Stowe's brother. But Calvin Stowe was a math teacher.
So what about
A math teacher. And Joshua became very friendly with Harriet Beecher Stowe and Calvin Stowe, as well as others. So when the Civil War broke out, Joshua was 34 years old. He had never commanded anything other than the deep respect of his students. But he joined the Union Army because he wanted to preserve the Union, the sacred experiment in government and self-government, and he wanted to end the abomination, the evil of slavery. Those two reasons were why he joined the Union Army. And Harriet Beecher Stowe had written another book, The Pearl of Orr's Island, and that she thought was more important than Uncle Tom's Cabin, because she then, of course, Uncle Tom's Cabin may be the novel that made her immortal, talking about an author who has written something that will be forever remembered. But The Pearl of Orr's Island, she thought was even more important because it dealt with women's liberation. One of the earliest, we're talking 1850s, because she felt that women were being second-class, third-class citizens, in some cases worse than the slaves that existed in the American South.
what happened to Joshua?
Well, Joshua joined the Union Army, and he saw first action at Fredericksburg, which was a terrible disaster for the Union forces. And Joshua survived that, but so many of his 20th Maine, that was his regiment, were killed in the earliest encounter. And he would, in that battlefield, he would be trying to give aid and comfort to the dead. Of course, he would write letters to the dying, family of the dying, and he said, I'm in the bone garden. That was his first experience. He thought that there were so many casualties and dead that he said, I'm in a living cemetery, I'm here. But at Fredericksburg, the great Long Island poet, Melville, Herman Melville and Ward, who's the great Long Island poet?
Ward Melville.
No, not Ward.
That's a high school. I don't know.
I'll think of it. It's another senior moment, which I've been having, Anyway, his brother was a nurse, and so was Clara Barton. Nurses at Fredericksburg and other key American battles. So, yeah.
So, and he was decorated after the war?
No.
During the war?
He was in on picket duty at Chancellorsville, which is another smashing Southern victory. And there's where Stonewall Jackson was killed accidentally by one of his own men on guard duty, thinking he was a Union infiltrator, and shot Stonewall Jackson in his shoulder. And they were carrying him back, and another shooting took place where one of the pallbearers dropped him on his shoulder, smashed the soldier, and he died about a week later. And that's when Robert E. Lee said, Stonewall Jackson may have lost his left arm because they had to amputate it, but I lost my
right arm.
my good right arm.
So,
Then he went to Gettysburg, and that's where he gained immortality and fame. He was at the critical point of the Battle of Gettysburg. He was at. Okay.
You're not supposed to look at the clock.
Oh, okay. he was at Little Round Top, and if Little Round Top fell, the Battle of Gettysburg was lost. And after all ammunition was exhausted, he ordered a downhill bayonet charge, which was astonishing, and succeeded. And for that, he was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. He went on to fight in 20 battles, was wounded 6 times, read his own obituary twice in the New York Times, survived the war, but died in 1914 at the age of 85, being the last Civil War veteran to die of his battle wounds.
Okay, so you are an accomplished writer, 4 books, 4 different genre. We have 1 minute left. What is your advice as a successful writer to people who are just starting out writing books?
Look at me. I had this dream. It was a writer's dream. And I persisted and kept it going. I refused to take no for an answer. I tried to explore every avenue that I could. For example, the reason I got my first novel published was because I met this marvelous writer, Pietro Di Donato, who wrote in 1939 a book called Christ in Concrete about the Italian experience. And he was very helpful in getting me to get an agent for my first book and my second book. And so I persisted. I know that's important, but it's an existential experience, writing, especially for a young writer who may or may not accomplish, and an old writer like me, where the reward is not in the guarantee of success. You're saying you're going to get, but the experience is the reward in itself. The effort and the experience is the reward.
It's not the end, it's the journey.
That's the journey. You're
That's
right
why I
about
started
that.
with journey.
That's right.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much.